On some Mondays, I volunteer as a math tutor at Rancho Brazos. And there's a table that's set aside for doing homework. So the other day I was there and waiting for the kids to come in from playing outside so I could help some people with their math, some kids with their math. And one of the other volunteers was going to work with this young child and help her read. And this young kid had picked up all her stuff, her backpack, and moved from the table she was at over to the homework table. And the volunteer is like, you are just such a rule follower, with a smile. And the little kid's like smiling, yes. And then I told her, well, this is probably going to serve you well later in life too. And then she smiled again, Rules are something that are, designed to help not only us in life, but to help us in society. I think one of the examples that's probably overused in sermons, so I'm going to use it again, is the speed limit. Okay, so why do we have a speed limit? We have a speed limit so we don't, perish on the freeways and on the roads. And because things have changed over time, the speed limit has gone up because theoretically cars have become safer. So that rule has changed, at least not inside the city, of course. They stayed the same. So rules and laws have basis behind them. Sometimes we may not know what the basis is, or we, have some strange imagination of the basis. An example is, did you know that it's illegal to wrestle a bear in Oklahoma? Now, don't think too much about why that rule is there, okay? Today, we're going to take a look at probably some of the most famous rules, at least for Jewish and Christian people, the Ten Commandments. So, the Ten Commandments, as Ron read about, were given to the Israelites. But before we get to talking about them, we're going to find out how the Israelites got to this place. Okay, so we're in the book of Exodus. Moses is the biblical character that we're working with. And Moses is probably the fourth major biblical character, if you would, that's driving the story. I mean, first we had Adam, then we had Noah, then we had Abraham, and now we're at Moses. Okay? So in the movie of Exodus, we'd have to have a little flashback to what would be the prequel of Genesis, if you would. So when we last left the people of Israel, they were in Egypt. Now they went to Egypt for a good reason. They were actually invited into Egypt. You see, Jacob's son, who was the great-grandson of Abraham, was now a very major political player in Egypt. He had a lot of power, did a lot of great things for both Egypt and Israel basically being his brothers and their kids. So they're coming into Egypt. They're living in Egypt. As we leave Genesis, we see that Joseph's family is settled in Egypt. But we do see a small seed of what could be potential problem. Okay? That seed is, the author of Genesis tells us that the people of Israel, Joseph's family, settled in the land of Goshen. Okay? We don't know what that is. But it says that the reason they settled in Goshen was they were shepherds. Now, to the Egyptians, for whatever reason, being a shepherd was not one of those fancy jobs. It wasn't one of those great jobs. And poor shepherds, they just get the bum rap throughout the Bible. They're always, out there, but they're always the ones who come to kind of, be part of saving the day, if you would. So the shepherds are off to the side. So we see the seed of the Egyptian nation having a separation to these Israelites. So flash forward to the book of Exodus, which is about deliverance. And in the book of Exodus, we learn that the leader of Egypt didn't know about Joseph, didn't know about the promises that were made, probably generations ago. We're not really clear as how much time elapsed. But by this time, Egypt has oppressed the children of Israel to the point of making them slaves. They were their labor force. So the Egyptians were, through this separation or what have you, were able to think of the Israelites so much that they were able to dehumanize them. So, enter Moses into the picture. Enter God back into the picture, who's responding from the children of Israel crying out over generations of being oppressed by the Egyptians. So God tells Moses, my friend, it's going to be you that's going to take care of this problem. And of course Moses said, no way. But God's persuasive. God's persuasive. Here's this bush, you're going to do the job. And then Moses rises to the occasion. So here we have Moses led people out of Egypt. They're going in the wilderness over to the promised land. And they're taking this trip, which, I don't know, maybe should have taken 2 years. Decide to take 40. So they're in the wilderness for a while. Okay? Now, they're in the wilderness, and we're getting close to Moses going up on the mountain, coming down with the 10 Commandments, but we are seeing some problems in the wilderness. Okay? And we're getting some reasons why these rules, these commandments are coming down, because when people were living in Egypt, they knew what was going to happen tomorrow. They knew what was going to happen tomorrow. What was going to happen tomorrow was not great. It was not good. But it was consistent. When they were living in Egypt, they didn't need to live with any faith because they knew what was going to happen. But out in the wilderness, there they had to have faith, because back in Egypt, certainty. Certainty of a tomorrow. Not a great tomorrow, but a certainty of a tomorrow. Out in the wilderness, they had to rely on God and things that they didn't know were going to happen. Every day was a little different. You see, faith was associated with their uncertainty. You know, we often think of, if you have a lot of faith, then your life's going to be certain. I think it may be the other way around. I think it may be the other way around, that the uncertainty of life is the thing that drives us to faith. And trusting in God, that God is going to be there for us when things are not as we expect. So, here we have the Israelites complaining. They're like, we need some food. God responds. We need some water. God responds. And yet they're still like, if we were back in Egypt, we knew exactly what we would get. This uncertainty is really difficult. So, all in this, Moses goes up to the mountain, gets the 10 Commandments. There's some issues, but we're not going to talk about those right now, okay? That Moses had to go back again. But he's down, and here we have these rules. So, why these rules? Why now? And what was the point? So, when the Israelites were living in Egypt, they lived under rules. They lived under rules. They lived under the rules of oppression. What the Egyptians said they had to do, they had to do. They knew what to do. But now they don't have any oppression. Now they need some guidelines about how to live, not as oppressed people, but as free people. They needed to learn how to live as free people. So God gives these 10 ways to live. Okay? Now, as we heard from Ron, we heard about some of those rules were about how we should respond to God. Now, this was and some of those rules were about how to respond with others. Now, this was kind of a novel idea in the ancient world, because, most people's idea of God was, well, I just gotta please God, and with the rest of it. We don't worry about, it's the God that I'm trying to serve, to appease so that God's happy with me. But the real God's rules were like, this is how you should worship, but Most of the commandments are about how you should live as free people with each other. How you should live as free people. Because in order to have a society, you needed to have some rules so that you could get along and prosper as a people together. So, let's take one of those rules, which maybe some people view as a favorite commandment. Because there's many people have favorite commandments and least favorite commandments. Now, your favorite commandment is the one that you think that you never violate. Because that one's easy. Oh, yeah, that one, I can cover that one, no problem. But this other one, maybe that's not my favorite commandment. Maybe I don't want to think about that one so much because that one cuts a little close to home. Now, we'll learn from Jesus later on. Jesus and the prophets will reinforce that you really shouldn't have any favorite and least favorite commandment because they all apply all the time. Okay? So let's take one of those that maybe we can think about. Maybe it's some people's favorite command because they don't think it applies to them. But we have the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Okay. Now, we often think of that's one of those commandments. Thou, that's an individual. Thou, you, should not kill. Shall not kill, not should, shall not kill. Well, what is that going to mean from a society standpoint? Now, in Egypt, as an oppressed person, there was a prohibition on killing, sometimes. Because as a slave in Egypt, you can be sure that the slave owners, the people that were oppressing the Israelites, didn't want them to kill each other because they were going to lose their labor supply. Maybe they weren't concerned with the morality of it, but they certainly wanted the labor supply to continue. So as an oppressed people, you knew how you could behave. But as free people, you're like, well, if someone makes me very, very angry, can I take their life? And God says no. God says no because it's morally wrong, because it's going to hurt your soul, and it's also something that is going to cause pain in your society. Because, here we have a people that are worried about uncertainty, and if they didn't have these rules, they're going to have even more uncertainty. So if you're not certain that your neighbor is going to respect your life, you can't really have a decent life. You can't have a society. You can't have people working with each other. So, we often think of thou shalt not kill as it's morally wrong with it, which it absolutely is, but there's even more to it. And when you start thinking about, I could have some retribution of violence toward that person, well, you're actually violating this commandment as well. This commandment means a lot of things. This commandment is one of them that Jesus talks about when he says, there's really only two kinds of commandments. You love God with all your heart and soul, and you love your neighbor as yourself. And obviously, thou shalt not murder. You're not loving your neighbor as yourself if you're thinking about violating that. So these are the 10 commandments. These are the starting point. We have, there's more to it, of course. The Jewish people will come up with more laws, more ways to live, more ways to not get close to violating these 10 commandments. But in addition to being for ourselves as individuals, these are ways that we can live as people that are free. And when we have to work with sin, sin is trying to take our freedom away. And these 10 commandments, these rules of God, are a gift to allow us to be free people who love our neighbors and love ourselves and love God. Amen.